There is immense strength in softness. There is courage in choosing to heal, in setting down the heavy lifting, and in claiming your peace as a non negotiable right. We are building the infrastructure for impact. A collective space where the diaspora can find tools, community, and the unshakable permission to slow down, process, and thrive. Your healing is not a luxury, it is the foundation. Join the movement. Let's build a softer, stronger tomorrow together.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Black Mental Health, the Black Mental Health Matters podcast. I'm your host for this morning, Ariana Johnson. I'm a licensed social worker, and today we are going to talk about the impact of telehealth and digital mental health. And I think that that's a vital conversation, especially during this day and age. I'm happy and fortunate to be amongst a panel of esteemed experts. So I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves.
Hello, I'll go first. My name is Dr. Karitha Ensminger. I am a therapist for a private practice telehealth company. So I've been doing telehealth for about the last 3 years in private practice. I'm also an adjunct professor for the field of psychology.
I'll go next. Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Daniel Mango. I'm a LCSW. I'm also an adjunct professor, University of San Francisco. I'm out in California. Also a therapist. I have my own private practice, and I work for the county of Sonoma. And then finally, I'm executive director of my nonprofit called Elephant Echo.
Good morning. I am Carolyn J. Murphy. I'm a keynote speaker, author, leadership consultant, and my work sits in the intersection of emotional wellness, lived experience, and human connection. I'm especially passionate about what happens beyond access, whether people truly feel seen, heard, and supported. I'm grateful to be here in this conversation.
Awesome. Welcome, everyone. And we're happy to have this conversation because, like I said, it's definitely a timely and impactful conversation. So the first question that I have for you all, has telehealth genuinely closed the access gap for Black communities, or has it mostly helped people who already have the resources to get care?
Honestly, I think I'm sorry. I would say it's a little bit of both. There's no one way to look at this. So it did close the gaps as far as those residing in rural areas or in areas where there are not enough professionals and a small amount of places where there's not enough access for various mental health professionals, especially certain ones that specialize in different issues that the Black community goes through. But it still must be considered that there's not enough access for those who don't have the means to, let's say, connect to the internet source or don't have enough devices to go around. So it's a little bit of both.
Yeah, and I'll chime in. I agree with that. I feel like it did close a distance gap, but not the trust gap. And then for like the Black community, trust is always a big barrier, and that kind of goes more into what telehealth, removing some geographic barriers. Yeah, we could talk to folks within rural places. However, it left some of the same economic and infrastructural barriers still intact, right? And I think it disproportionately still benefits folks who have the insurance, right? The broadband, a private space, devices, everything else like that. And then it still kind of leaves for the Black communities, like specifically those pre-existing barriers that we have, right? Cost, stigma, distrust of systems, provider shortages. Those haven't disappeared. They just have a new delivery method like layered right on top of that. So again, I think it has been helpful, but just to say like genuinely close the gap, no. And again, that's something I think all of us in this space are kind of working on, and that's why we're having this discussion today.
And to your point, I think that it definitely is a nuanced conversation about telehealth healthcare. It does broaden the opportunity for people, specifically in our community, to be able to obtain telehealth care, because we do have people who are in rural communities who are not able to go to an in-person appointment, right? So it does open up the door for other people from different parts of our community to receive the health care that they need. So that is a perfect segue into my next question. Hold on a moment. What's different about building trust with a therapist over a screen versus in person? And can that trust be as impactful or as deep?
I'll chime in. For me, this comes down to one distinction: access is not the same as connection. A screen can give us access to someone, but trust still has to be built through presence, consistency, listening, safety, and the feeling that the person on the other side is really with you. I often say hearing is not the same as listening. Someone can hear enough to respond while being distracted. And I say active listening says that I'm here with you in this moment. And I also say your presence is a present. So I do believe deep trust can develop virtually, but the technology cannot create the relationship.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And just to kind of build on that, like that trust ceiling, it isn't necessarily lower, but the path to get there is different and it requires more intentionality, right? And in person, like we build trust through like implicit cues, right? How someone holds that space physically, the waiting room, being witnessed when you kind of walk in. It's a little different when you're behind the screen, right? Because you lose a lot of that nonverbal, that embodied layer. And then for Black clients specifically, in my experience, it's just that the screen could lower some barriers, right? We have like privacy and things like that, but it can also raise other things, right? Because it is harder to build that relationality, that community rooted trust that's culturally centered to a lot of the care within Black communities. And then it's just a little different when you're being witnessed and kind of held within a physical space than just on a webcam, right? But again, the trust can get there, but it does take a lot more illicit relational labor, I guess, from the clinician, and then building that foundation for everything else. But again, it's not impossible. But yeah, you have to kind of have that, and then just thinking about how sessions are kind of structured. How are you as a clinician gonna be able to build that and get to that point?
I agree with the both of you. I think that using webcams and video, as helpful as it is, you do have to work that much harder as a clinician to build that rapport, right? Because we have to work hard to build rapport no matter what, even in person. But with telehealth, it's that much more effort required on our part to try to build that rapport and that trust. But it doesn't mean that at the end of the day that it won't be able to be built, right? It's not impossible. It's just that we have to work that much harder to build the rapport with our clients.
Yeah, and to expound upon that, I think that we have to be more creative when we go into a virtual space. I'm a therapist and I provide group therapy, and so I had to transition into a remote setting because the building that my office is in, lost power because of a thunderstorm. So we had to like transition into a virtual setting, and the clients who are normally engaged, they were like, I'm not really engaged this time. So, you have to provide validation. Like, I understand, this is a new normal for you, but what can we do to help you become engaged? Do you need to be like in a quieter room, or, what can I do for you for us to feel that connection so you can get what you need out of this session? So yeah, it's definitely a lot of work and innovation that comes in with that. The third question or the next question that I have is, we talked about this a little bit, is how much does privacy and not having to be seen walking into a therapist's office actually factor into someone's decision to try therapy?
I think privacy, honestly, is still a concern for many people, especially considering the Black community does still work through a lot of stigma with the mental health field. So I believe that telehealth does help with that a lot because, let's say, for example, someone may see you walk into a building and then what happens, right? If you don't want everyone to know that you're getting help, maybe you're just a private person. And then, like I said, many of those factors are cultural as well. With telehealth, you don't have to worry about that privacy of your own home or whatever office space that you choose to have. So it helps bridge that gap where there's less worry around a privacy concern. Like I said, also considering the stigma that may still be attached for many of us in the Black community.
Yeah, and for me, for a lot of Black clients that I work with, privacy isn't a preference; it's a precondition, right?
Mhm.
And it's just kind of building on, yeah, the stigma thing, right? Not being seen walking into, a therapist's office or things like that removes a barrier, a big barrier, right? But also like that community surveillance or what will people think of me, all those kind of ideas you might have. So having that telehealth space is great. However, it's also worth naming that privacy does enable access, but it can also isolate. And therapy becomes more private. It's more like an individual act. And the work that I like to do is more, that community based stuff. We want to do more communal healing models, right? Where struggle is meant to be witnessed and held by others and not hidden. But again, like when you are like in rural areas or places where you're unable to kind of do that, this is great, especially those small towns too, where people would talk about, oh wow, this person's going to therapy, oh this person needs help, this and that. So I feel like telehealth really does help so many folks with that. And then again, eventually, when that stigma is broken down a lot more, you can work with someone. Then maybe you could move more into like in person and everything else. But I think this is a big piece, that privacy piece, to kind of help people kind of work through it and at least get their foot in the door. But again, just kind of thinking that eventually, yeah, there might be a little more communal aspect, or like I said, the witnessing aspect of you.
I also think privacy can be a major doorway into care, especially in communities where mental health stigma is still real. For some people, being able to talk from home removes the fear of being seen walking into an office, like we all stated, and having to explain where they're going. But I would add that telehealth creates a different privacy question. Does the person actually have a private place, like we said earlier, at home where they can speak freely? So digital care may remove one barrier while removing another or revealing another. We have to think about both.
And that was something that I kind of wanted to bring up because I think that when people think about telehealth, they think that I can have these sessions wherever. Like I can be at Chick-fil-A and like, talking about my deepest trauma while ordering my food. And sometimes as clinicians, we have to create like a criteria as to what telehealth entails. So how do we have those conversations with our clients who are not familiar with telehealth care and the fact that we have to maintain privacy and confidentiality?
And I think that should be established about it from the get go, to be honest with you, about what telehealth is and what telehealth isn't. Because we really want to be beneficial to the client. They may think that being at Chick-fil-A is helpful, right? They want to grab a quick meal or something like that and talk to a therapist at the same time. While they want things to go that way, we can't do that because what if somebody walks by and hear you? It's an ethical concern anyway. But just establishing those rules from the get go for those who are completely new to telehealth. is important, and to keep that standard consistent, because sometimes, and I've seen this happen, where a client may understand in the beginning and then you catch them like outside near their car, walking around the park, or something like that. So being very consistent with how we set that standard, that you have to be in a private area where no one can see and hear you or anything like that.
And so, transitioning into the next question, what barriers still exist for people who want telehealth but don't have reliable a private space or the right device?
I would say it goes back to access, just a lack of access. Um, it's important to think about the ways of how to close that gap for those who don't even have access to the basic devices that we many of us take for granted.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's something for us all to consider. Many of us as telehealth therapists, just how do we expand that kind of access, especially for those in the Black community who are already facing barriers anyway. Even if you have all of the devices at your
Mhm.
fingertips, right? There's still so many who don't even have that. So I think that a lot of our focus should start to be on those who don't even have access to the basic devices as well, because there's barriers there.
Yeah, and I jump on that as well. The digital literacy gap is also a big one. And then we were talking about, yeah, that physical space and everything else. Because I do remember during COVID, at that time I was working as a school social worker and had to talk to students within their homes. But again, if they're in multi-generational households or they just live in a one bedroom or a studio, they don't have that kind of privacy, right? So how do you kind of work through that? And then also the device part that you kind of brought up as well. Yeah, if you don't have the latest device and everything else, how do we kind of still have that kind of access like that? Sometimes you can use the phone, you can use different things, but again, there's other concerns that kind of come up, safety concerns and things like that. So yeah, I think having us, expand telehealth is great. However, like I brought up in the beginning, what about the economic and the infrastructural kind of things? And that also brings us back to the access. What can we do? And maybe companies could be like, oh, we could provide you with, a free phone or something cheap technology, and then as for the space, that one will have to work out a little more. But yeah, I think there are some options there. But I think we need to lead with that because a lot of times when companies do start, it's the capitalistic model, right? Oh, I just want to make money. I want to pop this thing up as quickly as possible. I'm not really thinking about those folks who might not have the access. So let's build from the bottom up.
Yeah, and to your point, sometimes we as therapists have to put on our social work hat and case management hat and try to find, resources in the community that provide the access or the resources that our clients might need in order to have a access to telehealth care. I'm based out of Cleveland, Ohio, and we have multiple organizations like PCs for People that provide like affordable and free, refurbished computers and technical devices that someone can have access to. But, someone doesn't know that unless we as clinicians, like I said, provide that type of gateway to those resources. So, yeah, that's, us being able to kind of go outside of the landscape of just being a clinician and going into a space of case management or social work, has plays a pivotal role in someone really being able to obtain telehealth care. So the next question is, how has digital access made it easier or harder to find a therapist who actually understands your lived experience as a Black person?
I do think it's a little bit easier, um, considering that there's not as many geographical barriers when you're considering telehealth. There's various directories such as Psychology Today or ZocDoc where you can filter by ethnicity, sometimes language, sometimes gender, and specialty. Before we didn't have those types of directories, but considering that not only are you able to filter out and narrow down, the type of professionals that come up on these pages, but you're not having to filter too much out about distance when it comes to distance and saying, oh, this person has to be 5 to 10 miles from me. You could look for someone in the state of California, and not be worried about those types of barriers anymore. So it's creating more access that way.
Yeah, and I would say as well, um, digital access expanded the pool, but not the fit. And what I mean by that is, yeah, folks in geographic areas and rural areas, now they do have access to Black therapists that can understand their experience, that could help them. That's a huge win. However, the bigger issue is the overall shortage of Black clinicians. That still hasn't changed, right?
Yeah.
So digging through all these directories, trying to find someone who can really connect with you is still a big thing. And that's another thing that we have to kind of work as clinicians and figuring out, okay, how do we fill this shortage? But also, then another point is just because we do find a Black clinician doesn't mean that that's going to be the perfect fit for us as well, right?
Yeah.
We also have to think about that automatically it's not a right cultural fit at times. And then sometimes there can be non-Black therapists that do have some cultural humility that could serve better than we assume that they can as well. So I think finding those access points are going to be big, and that's a big question. But again, I think the main thing is that shortage, because there's not enough of us to kind of go around, and how do we kind of solve that? But it is a big win to be able now to have these directories and kind of lock in and find someone when you turn on that screen that looks like you, and yeah, could definitely relate to.
It brings us one step closer, right?
And so, yes, with the directories are very helpful, and then also, also the conversation about finding the right Black clinician, because every Black clinician is not for everyone, and so that plays a pivotal role. And then also, kind of to expound upon the conversation, like even if somebody was at the beginning of their therapeutic journey, organizations I know, like the Taraji P Henson Foundation, has access to free culturally competent and Black therapists, so that's another resource. But yeah, that conversation about finding the right clinician and finding the right telehealth clinician is something that needs to be consistently worked on. Um, the next question is, what gets lost when healthy moves from an in-person community-based space, um, when healing moves, excuse me, from an in-person community-based space to a one-on-one video call?
I could start. So again, like I said, I do a lot of you know connecting work, a lot of unity work. So I always like to bring people together. And I think the individualization of care is the quiet cost of the digital mental health kind of piece. And what I mean by that is like a lot of Black healing traditions, they are communal. We know we got the church, we got the extended family, we got elders, we have rituals, we have collective witnessing. In that one-on-one video calls, it compresses that healing into, private individual transaction. Again, it is needed. However, like you were kind of pointing out about the groups, right? It's really hard to kind of feel like you're in a space with others when we are just so kind of divided within that. And then there's also other kind of ways that we could kind of have that kind of connection. But yeah, I think losing that kind of community piece, and what I kind of mentioned earlier, having that kind of space where you could kind of be with others, and then, that kind of setting that's already kind of made for healing. And that's a little different than just being kind of in your own like living room and everything else.
Yeah, the environment and the setting does play a pivotal role, because if you are in like your laundry room hosting a therapy session, that kind of like, you know, kind of defeats the purpose of therapeutic healing. You might want to have an office, or, somewhere where it's like nice and tranquil and quiet, so that it can, you can try to provide the same impact that you would in a community-based in-person office. Um, are there specific mental health conditions or situations where telehealth just doesn't work as well as in-person care?
I honestly think it depends on the severity of the disorder, across various disorders. But certain situations that I can think of off of the top of my head would be certain clients with schizophrenia, very heavy psychosis, or very heavy delusions, but also clients who are or may be suicidal or prone to self harm. Um, People who need, or clients who need immediate attention and one on one intervention in person, or just crisis response. I think that telehealth will be more of a barrier for those groups.
Yeah, and I agree with that because I do a lot of trauma work, a lot of crisis work, and that's the huge point, right? The acuity,
Yeah.
depending on how a person is, because it's hard to really do a crisis and a safety assessment, read the room
Hmm.
when you're digital, right? Because you don't know what that person's doing. Like right now, I'm talking to you, but you don't see what's happening with my hands. I could be harming myself. I could be doing all these different things, and
Right.
you're not able to kind of do that. There's also like deep trauma work is like another thing, right? Because sometimes you need that embodied co-regulation there, the nervous system attunement between the two bodies within that shared space. It's really hard to fully replicate that through a screen. You can do some of it, but yeah, it won't be fully doing that. And again, if someone is in, you were saying acute psychosis, schizophrenia, someone's manic, or someone's like disassociating, that's also a hard part. So I think having those limits and making people kind of understand, like, yes. And again, it goes to the clinician. I could support you. However, we have a plan in place. If these things kind of come up, all right, you're going to have to go to the hospital. You're going to have to see someone in person because I'm not going to be able to help you from this distance. And that keeps them safe, keeps you safe, and then that keeps that connection and that relationship going.
Right.
Yeah, and I totally agree. If somebody is dealing with a high level of suicide ideation, it's kind of, and you have to go into like a decompression mode with your client. It's kind of difficult to do that, via telehealth. Also, if somebody is going into self-harming behaviors, picking at their nail cuticles or whatever the case may be. And also if they're in the home and they have access to weaponry, that's kind of counterproductive. So, if the level of acuity is extremely high, it's probably more so beneficial for them to have in person care where it's mutual and, physically safe for them to be there to discuss their trauma. Absolutely. Um, the next question is, are there specific, oh, actually, what should someone look for or watch out for when choosing a telehealth platform or a provider?
Well, I think we hit on some of the things earlier, but the things
Mhm.
I would have people look for is definitely like credentialing, making sure that the person is licensed, right,
Mhm.
within their state. Again, as a client, you don't really have to worry too much about that. The app should be able to kind of take care of that, but that's another thing to kind of think about, because again, that could be an issue later on, especially if you're developing a relationship with someone, and then if they falsify the information or where they're kind of at. Another
Mhm.
one could be like their competence, right?
Mhm.
Not just cultural competence, like humility. What are they doing? Who do they work with? Do they understand the issues that you kind of have? Because again, anyone could put culturally responsive care, but what does that mean, right? And kind of digging in, because it's also like a interview as well. Like when you're vetting these therapists, I tell my clients that as well. Like my whole job is to help you get the care you need. If it's not a good fit, you let me know. I'm not going to be hurt by that. My whole point is to get you the help that you need, and if we don't make it fit, I'll help you kind of find that fit, and we'll kind of go from there. The other thing with like platforms, you also have to watch out for is like cost transparency, right? Because a lot of them will start to kind of raise up costs, and they won't tell you about the things that are kind of come on. You might get these subscriptions, and y'all know from just having apps on your phone, you kind of get
Mhm.
that as well. And the last one I think I would say is also like the relationship with the process of the telehealth place, because a lot of places you might have like a high provider turnover. There might be like a chat box intake. Yeah, you don't want that, because again, it doesn't put you first or people first. You want to have a clinician, a provider there to kind of greet you. So treat it like it's like an in-person kind of environment. just because you're digital doesn't mean that you have to skimp out on all those different things. So I would say look for some of those things when you first start.
Absolutely. Does anybody else have any type of insight as pertains to that question?
I feel like Dr. Daniel said all of it pretty
Yeah.
much.
Awesome. How do digital tools and we kind of talked about this, but just to reemphasize what we mentioned earlier, how do digital tools like apps, chatbots, or AI-based support fit into the bigger picture of mental health care for our community? Because to your point, we are living in a world where TikTok, Instagram, Facebook for for the millennials, older millennials like myself, play a pivotal role in people feeling comfortable with talking about their mental health. So how can we utilize apps in order to normalize people seeking out mental health care?
Yeah, I could start because this one kind of comes up a lot for me. I like to say like they're a bridge, but they're not the destination, right? They're good for the wait, but they're dangerous as a replacement for the real thing. And what I mean by that is they're a supplement for a care pipeline. Like they all have, you know, a purpose, and there's ways that you can use them and utilize them, but they don't substitute for real mental health care with someone who's licensed, who went to school, who has all this kind of expertise that could kind of support you. What I do think they're good for is like psychoeducation, kind of learning about things, low acuity support if you have to bridge the gap, like if you're waiting to get to a therapist, and also like self monitoring, right? Like, okay, yeah, I could notice when I'm anxious, or I can learn some breathing techniques or things like that, that I don't have to pay or wait for, a main person to kind of do. But you also have to look out for the risks. Again, like you were kind of alluding to, using that as a replacement for an actual clinical relationship, especially anything for like moderate to high folks, right? There's been in the news about that, people using like chat GTP to talk about their symptoms. Maybe they have schizophrenia, maybe they do have bipolar or some mood disorder, and then they end up by completing suicide, or harming themselves because this chat box is telling them that. And then I also read an article, I don't know, a few weeks ago, about people saying, "Oh, I like this chatbot, or I like AI because it tells me what I want to hear." Yeah, I mean that's good if you want, but again, healing isn't just what you want to hear. I don't want the client to come in like, "Oh, we're having a friendship." No, we're having this relationship where I'm supporting you, where I could kind of tell you, and that's why you're coming to a third party, because I can help you see the things and not just be in this vacuum, this echo chamber. And I think that's what a lot of that stuff does, and also with these algorithms, they just keep feeding you what you want to kind of hear. So we also have to look out for that when we're looking at these things. And again, not saying that all this stuff is bad. It does have a purpose, but just knowing that there's a limited purpose of what it could do, and it's not the true healing that you kind of need if you're going to go fully forward with that.
To your point, like you're mentioning, balance. It's okay to go on some of these apps, like you said, if it's low acuity, or if you want to just spread awareness or be aware of your own situation to a certain point, right? While you're waiting for a clinician or a good clinician fit. But everything should always be supplemented by a professional, period, point blank. If it's not, you can't monitor yourself on these apps and that's it. So it's okay to have a balance of it. I do think it helps break down some of the stigma around mental health in the Black community as well. It gets us all talking about mental health, and it's okay to educate yourselves or the community about mental health, right? And these digital apps can help with that. I know, like off the top of my head, as you mentioned, Dr. Dan, with breathing techniques that some people use, like the Calm app, for example, something to help them kind of become calm and go to sleep, or lessen their anxiety. But it should definitely not replace a professional, an actual human. So, yeah, balance.
Absolutely. It's very important. I love the Calm app, and a lot of my clients use those type of apps. But then I have to reemphasize the importance of pairing them with actual clinicians, because to you guys' point, a lot of AI motivated apps such as Chat GPT, they tell you what you want to hear. And sometimes you don't need to be validated. Sometimes you need to be challenged in order to move forward with your mental health journey. And so that's what a clinician will do. Will challenge you, but we know, that this challenging is for the benefit of your mental health. And Chat GPT is not going to do that. So it's very important for our, people, us as clinicians, to let our people know that yes, these calming apps are great, but they also need to be paired with somebody who has the education of being a clinician so that we can take it, 5 steps further. All right. The last question is, where do you all see digital mental health care headed in the next 5 years? And what needs to happen for it to actually serve Black communities well?
I can start really quick. So next 5 years, technology is going to advance regardless, right? We just know that we've seen it. There's no stopping this. It's going. You're either going to get on a train or, it's just going to leave you and pass you by. But I think the main question is whether the people building it are going to build equity from the start or bolt it in afterwards. And what I mean by that is like we need intentional, as we kind of talked about earlier, investments in broadband and device access, not just app development. We also need a growing pipeline of Black clinicians, right? How do we grow and end that shortage that we have? That's also going to add to it. And we also need culturally specific platforms and provider matching, not just those one size fit all models, right? And we kind of alluded to all this when we were, today during our kind of conversation, everything else. And I also think, looking more in the future is like these maybe having like hybrid models when it comes to telehealth, doing maybe something like community-based digital care, not just individual teletherapy. I think that's a really great place for opportunity kind of be. WhatsApp's another place where, especially at Elephant Echo, we leverage a lot. We do a lot of learning through that. That's another way to get community and kind of people talking like that and doing things. So yeah, I think 5 years from now, I'm hoping it's a lot better in terms of having more clinicians, more access, and everything else. But again, the equity piece is going to be huge because a lot of technology, as we know, it moves forward. But yeah, that social piece always gets kind of bolted on at the end, and we don't need that right now. I think we need to move forward with the social first, and then worry about the technology and everything a little later. But it is making strides, and yeah, I'm so glad that telehealth has become a reality for us because it has been so helpful with the work that we do and the work that I do specifically.
I'll chime in. I hope that the same, pretty much what you were saying, making care more human, accessible, culturally responsive, and connected. Technology can remove the distance, but if people still can afford the care or cannot access reliable internet, or cannot find providers who understand their lived experience, or do not find a safe space to access it and safe enough to trust the system, then we have digitized the same gaps. So for the Black communities to be served well, access has to include connection, cultural understanding, affordability, trust, and real listening.
I agree with what you all said, and increasing access should be part of this future for the next 5 years. I don't see AI honestly going anywhere. My hope is that it does not replace clinicians in any way, Black or otherwise, but knowing that people will still continue using AI just to create more awareness around that and the urgency around that, because, like I said, next 5 years, I'm sure it's going to blow up. Increasing access and digital literacy for the Black community is still going to be important as young people are growing up, right? And people just need access to digital literacy and the ways of how to navigate telehealth and spread awareness to mental health, to the mental health field at large. It's really going to be important in the next 5 years.
Okay, so full transparency, I know that I mentioned that that was the final question, but I just received some bonus questions from the producer Daniel in the chat. So if you all could provide insight on these questions, that would be great. Um, How can someone communicate to their therapist that they are uncomfortable, confused, or need additional support during a virtual session?
I would say if it's in the middle of the session, um, the best way you can do is, or the best way forward would be to let them know that you're open, that you're not coming from a judgmental space. And if this is not a good fit between you and the client, then it's just not a good fit. So just reminding them that you are there for them, you are there to support their mental health, and it's not a competition between providers or anything like that, right? If they have to go to a new provider or they're uncomfortable for any reason, it's important to address it right then and there. The last thing I would want is a client to remain uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I'd say also, Dr. Creethy brought this up earlier, but from the jump, right? When we start our relationship within therapy, we should already communicate this to our clients, right?
Right.
Here's the plan. If you're not feeling well, this is what you could do. Be open, yeah, things like that. Like already have that kind of set. So then when you do reach this point, if you are in the middle of a session or something like that, they're able to kind of do that. They're so more comfortable, they're more relaxed because I do hear a lot of clients, they'll come to me, have these relationships with people, and then maybe their therapist kind of invalidated them or made them feel bad or kind of bullied them. And I'm like, wait, hold on. This is not what care should look like, right? If
Right.
you having an issue, I want to help you. So what do we do? And again, we have that crisis plan already built in. Oh, I'm not feeling well. Okay, Dr. Mango, what can we do? Okay, we're going to call these places. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. You're good. We got you. We're going to stabilize. We're going to do these different things. So I think having that from the jump is really good. But also, like I said, just being in the middle of a session and having that comfort in that relationship already built, because that therapeutic relationship is gonna, determine again if this person comes back or if we're going to be able to keep them safe, throughout our whole relationship as well.
Okay. And then another question that we have is, and we talked about this earlier as it pertains to the different environments that we as Black people have received healing over the years, from the church to other faith-based organizations, even in like, the spaces in our houses. So historically, this is where Black healing has came from. Has Do you think that telehealth can ever replicate that communal element, or does it have to?
Well, kind of what I said earlier, that idea maybe 5 years do more of a hybrid kind of model. But honestly, I don't know. In my opinion, I would say no. I don't think it really needs to do that. I think the communal space is the communal space, and we should keep that communal space. And I think the telehealth and everything else, yes, it could be its own lane. But yeah, there's nothing that kind of replaces that human interaction. And again, yeah, we're gonna have more time to have this one-on-one, this telehealth, this more technology. But yeah, we still need those third spaces where people can kind of go and still have that way to kind of lift off. And again, like I was mentioning earlier, that witnessing, right? That community part, because that's part of the healing. And I don't think any amount of technology is going to replace that unless you make something where, all of us are augmented in the same room. But again, we're still in the same room, right? So those energies aren't mixing, all that other kind of thing, that shared space within there. So yeah, me personally, I would say, yeah, we don't need to kind of really replicate that. We could just do that in person. But again, it's up to other folks and everything else and how they feel, but also how they want to heal, right? Because again, ultimately, I'm not the one; it's the person or the community that has the final say when it comes to healing.
How do we make sure that telehealth is not a form of isolation? I know that during the pandemic, when people were receiving telehealth care, that's when depression and anxiety was at an all-time high because they felt like they didn't have anyone to talk to. They were craving that sense of communal care that we, just talked about. So now that we are in a world where telehealth is optional and is seen more as a convenience or another option rather than the necessity? How can we create a space as clinicians where they don't, where our clients don't fall into a deeper space of isolation?
Yeah. Well, with my clients, I do this all the time. Um, because I'm primarily telehealth, I always encourage them to get out in the community, to engage in hobbies still, to if they are a part of an organization or even a faith-based organization, still become involved. I know many clients that I've dealt with depression. A lot of times they do want to isolate, and I said it's okay to have a bounce there and kind of be alone, but you don't want to be completely isolated. So I encourage my clients to still get outside, even if it's just going to a coffee shop or something like that. And it's not like you always have to be in this big crowd, right? But social interaction is still important and it should still be a supplement to telehealth when we are in therapy one on one.
Exactly. I chime in on that. And Dr. Creetha, you talked about earlier, that balance, right? We need the balance. And I think that's what's missing. And I feel like it's kind of when we have these discussions about digital stuff, it's like this binary, right? It's either this or
Right.
that. But what
Mhm.
about that whole space? There's a big spectrum there of those possibilities. And yeah, encouraging your clients to join organizations or to be a part of communities, everything else. We do a lot of Black healing spaces within our organization, and those healing spaces aren't just for you to talk about your issues, it's for you to connect. So we make sure that people within those spaces are talking with each other. Maybe they'll exchange their numbers or whatever. So someone who is depressed or shy or isolating, yeah, they could start having that community connection. And it could just start with a text message or a group chat, but eventually, yeah, they could get out, they could get in nature, they could join, these organizations, do hobbies and things like that. So I think it is a balance, but it's also, yeah, encouraging folks to kind of do that because, like we were talking about earlier, it is good to have this private space, but again, that also leads to isolation. So, how do we kind of break through that a little bit?
And then, one way that we can break through that space is like vulnerability, right? And, because it's very difficult for our clients to be vulnerable in a space where, you know, they might not be, very, they might not have the ability to, some of our clients have children, they share spaces with other people. They might not be able to be in a space where they can just talk about their deepest trauma or something like that. So, how can we create a space where we can let our clients know, or they can let us know that they're uncomfortable, even in the space that they're in? How can we communicate, let them know that it's okay for us, for them to tell us that they're uncomfortable or they're feeling a sense of pain or a sense of high level of acuity in their respective spaces during a telehealth appointment?
I would honestly say use what we can in those moments, because we're still limited even with telehealth, right? Sometimes we have the chat box with a lot of these platforms, and not like a separate chat or anything like that. But if someone, let's say, can't really talk about certain things, but they still want to get it out in that session, they can just chat me. That way I'll read it. We could probably chat a little bit back and forth, or just ask them if there's a possibility that we hold off on that specific issue for next session where they can be a little more in a privacy of their own home or wherever they could find complete privacy, because I still want them to get the most out of telehealth. I don't want them to still feel uncomfortable or that something's not private enough. So, like I said, just using whatever resources you can in those moments, but letting them know I'm here for them. Let's try to check whatever options we have on hand. So,
And kind of like a perfect segue into that question, I mean, to the next question, do you think it's easier for our clients to share their most like uncomfortable moments via telehealth? Or do you think that it will, and we kind of talked about it earlier, as it depends on the high level of acuity and things of that sort. But if someone is not dealing with a high level of acuity, if they're not dealing with levels of suicide ideation, maybe they're dealing with a high level of just general anxiety disorder, do you think that it's easier for them to talk about their feelings via telehealth, or do you think that that kind of warrants them, scheduling an in-person appointment?
I specialize in anxiety and I'm telehealth. So it just
Mhm.
boils down to the client.
Okay.
Many that I see, of course, by the time they get to me, they know I'm telehealth. So I do talk about anxiety with them. Of course, as Dr. Daniel mentioned, sometimes you miss a bit of visual cues if they are experiencing those symptoms in the moment. But there's some cues I do see. Like I still see some fidgeting or sometimes in their speech, for example. So it's not super limited as far as um, someone with anxiety, for example, that you brought up. It's you can still deal with it via telehealth. It's not like telehealth just limits that.
Mm.
Yeah, and I would also like to add too. Honestly, this question depends on the situation as well. Depends on
Yeah.
the client and also a clinician, right? Because Dr. Karitha said, "Does this? This is your jam. You have more skills than some other folks, might have in person. This and that, whatever." But again, there's also some clients who will benefit for being a person because that clinician in the room and everything else. So yeah, I think it does depend, and I don't know if it does make it easier for somebody. They can, but again, that's also brings up things like, yeah, maybe I've been able to share, but I might be disassociating more, or I might be like looking away. And then being in person, you might not be able to kind of do that as much, right?
Mm.
So yeah, I think it depends on the situation. But for folks with like mild to moderate, yeah, I think telehealth is a really good space for them to be able to kind of talk through a lot of the different things. But it always goes back to that therapeutic relationship. I think if you said in the beginning, you could really make people really comfortable and be able to kind of share. And I've seen it because I've done it. I mean, I've worked with clients for months and months and months, and they might not want to share, but you're building that relationship. I'm going to be there for you. I'm going to support you. I'm here, right? You're in a safe space. You can be vulnerable. Even I will show some vulnerability, right? You're modeling that. You're kind of showing them, and eventually it kind of goes. So yeah, I'll kind of leave it at that. It's one of those things where it depends on the situation, but yeah, there is, pluses and minuses on both sides.
Mm. And you talked about the lack of, accessibility or diversity amongst Black licensed clinicians, and that's still like an ongoing issue. So let's just say a Black clinician does have the credentials, does have the experience, and wants to transition into telehealth, to provide a broader um, practice, to people outside of, the community that they live in. What advice would you all give them, with beginning their practice as a telehealth therapist?
I would tell them to give it as much effort as you would in person. Some
Mhm,
people may make the mistake that they could be a little more lax because it's telehealth. You still have to plan your schedule accordingly to avoid burnout. I would really
mhm,
emphasize that because even though you're seeing someone probably from your home office or something similar, it's still therapy. You're still
mhm,
giving a piece of yourself to the client and in your undivided attention and your active listening skills. So all of the skills that you still would have in person, you will have via telehealth. The only difference is the actual screen, but you're working even that much harder, as I said in the beginning, to build that rapport, to push and a lot of effort to build that rapport for the client. So I would definitely warn about that and the potential burnout that can happen if they're not careful with how they do their schedule or what they're specializing in, or are you taking high or low acuity clients and things to look
mhm,
out for in that regard.
mm. Awesome.
Yeah,
And
and
then
that's. Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
no, go
I
ahead,
just
go
wanted to
ahead,
add
go
something.
ahead, go
Yeah,
ahead.
all those things are great. The organization, right? Making sure that you have a great schedule. You protect yourself from burnout. All these different things, and also I think kind of just staying true to yourself. I think that's a big thing because again, like we mentioned before, these apps, like you will get on them and they'll send you folks and everything else, but a lot of folks don't identify like, okay, I might be, taking on more than I can handle, or I might be, sacrificing a part of me or my ethics to kind of meet
Mhm,
this need, right? And as Black clinicians, we gotta, keep that box kind of
Mhm.
tight, right? So we're
mhm,
able to kind of do it. So then we last in this position because yeah, we can get more of us here, but again, if we're not able to kind of take care of ourselves and maintain ourselves, but also connecting to our own communities as well, right? And then we're able to kind of keep that lineage and that line kind of going there.
And this is the action question. If we could leave our audience with one step to try something this week or try to consider going into or transitioning into a telehealth setting, specifically maybe scheduling a telehealth appointment, what resources or steps would you suggest that they take?
I would ask them to go in with an open mind, but also kind of what Dr. Daniel said about us clinicians to them, staying true to yourself. Just look for, being honest and open, but being true to yourself, making sure that you think the clinician may be the best fit for you, using whatever resources you can use, like a directory to narrow things down, and just try it out. If it's not for you, that's okay. But if you're open to trying it out, please have an open mind about it, but also be open about your concerns about it if there are any. So staying true to yourself with that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I like to add too, like kind of prepping, you know, like you're actually going to have the telehealth, right? Making sure you have the connect, like we did for this interview, right? There's the
Mhm.
podcast, like making sure we have the technology, finding that private space, doing those things like that. And even if you don't make that connection, boom, I'm already kind of set up. I'm ready to go.
Mhm.
But also maybe like write down like 3 things that you kind of want to name and you would like to approach or you like to ask somebody, right? It's kind of like I said, shopping around, thinking about it. Maybe give someone a call or make that initial appointment. And again, you don't have to take it, you don't have to do anything, but show your curiosity, right? And just ask those kind of questions and kind of go from there. Because I think just kind of running through it and previewing it will start to kind of lower anxiety down if you're kind of thinking about it, but also get you moving in that direction. Because you could say, oh yeah, I want to do this, but what am I actually doing to make this kind of happen? And again, setting that space, seeing you have access, and then writing some things down, I think is a good start for folks who want to kind of get into it.
Awesome. Well, I thank you all, my esteemed panelists. This was definitely a very beneficial and impactful conversation. I thank the audience for their participation. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you all next time. And you all have a great and tranquil Saturday.